We've been here for 82 years as a university, so if you'll bear with me for 2 minutes, I want to properly introduce our guest. We've had a long list of greats come onto this campus, not the least of which, when she dined here alone, of course, is Dr. Frances Bartlett Kinney, who's here with us today at 98 and a half years old. So under Dr. Kinney's leadership, with whom I'm transferring now, and others, we've been fortunate to have hosted United States Presidents Lyndon Johnson, Gerald Ford, Chemistry Nobel Prize winner Linus Pauling, anthropologist Margaret Mead, Ben Bernanke, Václav Klaus, and in the arts, especially with what we're going to talk about today, in the arts, Carl Sandburg, Dave Brubeck, Arthur Fiedler, Aaron Copland, Bob Hope, Jack Benny, Duke Ellington, George Plimpton, Billy Joel, and others on this campus in this exact spot. We've never had a day quite like today in this audience. Just in the past year, we've been pleased to host Mitt Romney on our campus, and then in a very magical day, we were able to attract to come to campus twice the commander of Apollo 15, Colonel David R. Scott. Colonel Scott not only is one of 12 men ever to go to the moon and walk, but the first person ever to drive the lunar module, lunar rover, and he was here at Jacksonville University, and we were honored to have him here. In keeping with our tradition of bringing quality individuals onto our campus, we move to today. This is a gentleman who's told the most compelling stories of our time. I think the greatest storyteller of our generation. Those of you who know him will know he does not want us talking a great deal about him, but he embodies everything about the Global Citizen Award that we're here to talk about. Just in my house alone, 2 days ago, you remember there was a football game being played. Two things were happening at the same time Sunday afternoon at 4:30. Ricky Fowler was about to go into a playoff in the PGA Tour event, and we were switching back and forth at a Super Bowl party between that and the prep for the Super Bowl, and we went past WJCT. Our great friends at WJCT were showing the Roosevelts, and we stopped and we watched the Roosevelts. From 4 to 6 p.m. on WJCT this past Sunday, on Super Bowl Sunday, the costs were watching the Roosevelts. So when it comes to exceptional education and enlightened discourse, I believe Mr. Burns stands head and shoulders above others. In 30 seconds, let me tell you, over his 30-year career, he has directed and produced many of the most acclaimed documentaries in the history of film. And what a remarkable range. Think of the range: the Civil War, baseball, jazz, Lewis and Clark, the war, the national parks, the Roosevelts, and most recently, cancer, the emperor of all maladies. He's considered by many the greatest documentary of this generation, and by many of all generations. His films have been duly recognized, and you're going to get a chance to see a couple that have not yet been released later today, but think about this: 14 Emmy Awards, 2 Grammy Awards, 2 Oscar nominations, the Peabody Award, the Lincoln Prize, the Steinbeck Award, and so many others. He's the recipient of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Lifetime Achievement Award, and the Civil War was proclaimed the greatest, most influential documentary of all time. He's been given more than 25 honorary degrees from esteemed universities, and a pretty fair place in Palo Alto, California. Stanford has just asked him to be the commencement speaker at their 125th commencement just 5 months from now. It would be an underestimation for any of us to say that we've ever had this kind of positive, influential, educational force on our campus. So I hope you'll join me in welcoming to the podium this year's Jacksonville University Presidential Global Citizen Award, Mr. Ken Burns.
Wow, you got here in a hurry. Thank you.
Can I actually give you this award?
Yes, indeed. Oh, that's lovely. Are y'all warm? Because I am. I'm warmed by this beautiful day in Florida, not New Hampshire. I'm warmed also by your kindness and enthusiasm. I feel always compelled to inoculate myself when someone lists the various accomplishments. I live in this tiny village in New Hampshire, have for the last 37 years, made most of the films from there. It has fewer people in its little village than are in this room under this tent, and I like it that way. But I have on my refrigerator an old and now faded cartoon that shows two men standing in hell, the flames licking up around them. And one guy says to the other, "My apparently 200 screen credits didn't mean a damn thing." They actually don't. What matters more is something like this. There is the word global in it, which makes me gulp a little bit because you are looking at the most provincial of filmmakers. I have made all of my films over the last 40 plus years entirely in and about the United States of America, which I think, as Lincoln said in a message to Congress in 1862, was the last best hope of earth. But I am also aware of what the great poet William Blake, the English poet, said. He said that you could find the world global, that you could find the world in a grain of sand. That means sometimes in our religious teachings we say, as above, so below. That we have a chance to find in the particular something extraordinarily important that relates to the universal and to the general. And so in the spirit of that these small stories or bigger stories in American history might not just speak to our extraordinary example as a people hurtling through space, grappling with the most complicated problems that humankind has, but that the problems and the events, the heroism and the leadership that we exhibit are also traits common to a complicated and striving world. You know, we live in a superficial media culture. I am so happy to be involved in public television, which rejects the superficiality of that world in favor of nuance and complexity. When we embrace that nuance and complexity, we find a great deal of similarity in all of us. No longer are we divided by being red state or blue state, male or female, young or old, black or white, whatever it is that we distinct, but we become human beings. And that has been, in some ways, the major message of all that film, all the films that I've made. Each film asks the same question over and over again. Who are we? Who are those strange and complicated people who like to call themselves Americans? What is interesting and also embarrassing about some recognition like that is that I stand up before you this afternoon, not as a singular human being who's had a list of accomplishments you deemed worthy of your extraordinary support and acknowledgement, but that I represent a whole team of people, and I did not get here without that team. Film is a gloriously collaborative medium, and I'm honored to work with some of the finest filmmakers to make those films. A lot of the credit comes to me, but it really deserves to be shared. And we don't come here alone. It was not without the Better Angels Society that I would not be able to put on my films, without the long-term support of the Arthur Vining Davis Foundations for more than 25 years have been involved in supporting the work. For longer than that, my dear friend Bobby Stein of Jacksonville has been not just that, a dear friend, but an amazing advisor, an amazing thinker, a long-range planner, and I don't know what I'd do without him. And finally, I had an opportunity to speak to the local PBS station today, and I just have to tell you that without public broadcasting, I would not be here. So on behalf of what now seems like a whole globe of human beings standing behind this, I very proudly accept this award. Thank you so much. This is a big day.
Because he's the greatest storyteller in baseball, I thought we would honor Ted Burns and Grant White. part of the fun of having someone with a reputation and experience of Ken Burns is how at ease he is in a very open conversation. We asked him, much as we did with Indra Nooyi a couple of years ago, if he would sit for 15 or 20 minutes worth of questions, and he's been very gracious to do that. So I'll get this started. Many of you have sent these forward, but there's a few that are on people's minds. Ken, if I can start, you've used the term better angels a number of different times. Can you help us understand what the term means, what the organization means?
Yes, well, the organization is itself a nonprofit fundraising tool. We realize that in addition to corporate support, and we enjoy the support of the Bank of America, not only the sponsors of today, but also the long-term sponsors of our films as our sole corporate sponsor. We enjoy some governmental support, some established foundations like the Arthur Finding Davis Foundations, but we also enjoy the support of many individuals of wealth around the country who've made significant contributions. The name Better Angels comes from my favorite sentence, or I should say the second favorite sentence in the English language. I love you sort of trumps everything else. And that is at Lincoln's first inaugural, when he was hoping somehow to keep his countrymen from going to war. He pleaded to the mostly Southerners in his audience, we must not be enemies, we must be friends. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. But then this poet-president went on in this final sentence to say something that's so meaningful to me. He said, the mystic chords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will yet swell the chorus of the Union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of our nature. Now that sentence could not stop the war that was about to come, but I think all of us here know what he meant, that we are too often distracted in our daily lives by baser and cruder instincts, that we always wish our faith, our art, our communities, our friendships tell us that we should be tilting towards the better angels of our nature. And that, to me, just seemed the highest purpose that we could imagine.
Thank you. And we lay people who are not expert in your field think that someone gets ready to make a movie, and they work on a movie, and then the movie comes out 2 years later. Can you help us understand how many projects do you have underway and what sorts of things are interesting you these days?
Well, I'm working actually on 10 films, and I said to someone earlier today, if someone tells you they're working on 10 films, they're lying, but I promise you that we are actually, films are happening all the time. You know, let me bring back New Hampshire. I live in New Hampshire, this tiny little village, and we make maple syrup there. It takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. And that's exactly what our movie making, our filmmaking is about. We have a shooting ratio of about 40 to 1. So when you see an 18-hour film on the history of the Vietnam War, something we're releasing next year, we've got 40 times that material that we haven't used. So we have a film that's coming out this spring in April on the life of Jackie Robinson, a 2-part, 4-hour documentary. We're going to show some clips of it. We've got a film called Defying the Nazis about a Unitarian minister and his wife who, on the eve of World War II and after it began, helped get Jews out of Czechoslovakia and later southern France and Spain and Portugal and here to the United States. We've got a film, as I said, a 10-part, 18-hour film on the history of the Vietnam War, where we just opened our editing room on a history of country music. We've been shooting and are now got the first draft of a script on a film about Ernest Hemingway. And then there are 5 or 6 other projects that I'm working on, helping other filmmakers, serving as an executive producer rather than the producer, the director, the co-writer, and the executive producer, helping them get started or have an easier time trying to get funding and trying to pass it along. So lots going on.
Yeah, so that, in case you didn't hear it, he's working on 10 films at the same time. Public research says that coming up from you, Jackie Robinson, Vietnam, country music, Ernest Hemingway, and stand-up comedy. If you all can find the common thread there, give me a call. So I'm interested in what attracts you to something, and for those of us in higher education and students in the room and supporters, your line between education and entertainment is extraordinary. So one, what attracts you to a project, and two, which way do you look at education or entertainment?
The first part is very, very simple. It's just a good story. I mean, the word history, I am a filmmaker. I happen to work the way a painter might work in oils as opposed to watercolors and do landscapes instead of still life. I do films in American history. What's fortunate is that the word history, contrary to what many people's experience in being taught history has been, the word history is mostly made up of the word story plus hi, which is not bad. It invites you into a story, and that's what we do all day. History isn't just some irrelevant thing. It's Harry Truman said the only thing that's really new is the history you don't know. If you know where you've been armed in an incredibly special way to know where you are and where you may be going. And so there's something hugely important about that. Now, the art of storytelling, the same laws apply to Steven Spielberg as they apply to me. And he and I have talked about this at great length many, many times. The only thing is, I can't make stuff up, and he can. But the same laws of storytelling apply. When your wife says, when Stephanie says, "How was your day?" you don't say, "I backed slowly down the driveway, avoiding the garbage can at the curb, pulled into the street, went up to the stop sign, turned my blinker on." What we do as human beings is edit our human experience using known laws. If any of you have ever read Aristotle's Poetics, that's about as close as you can come to the laws of storytelling. Beginning, middle, and end, climax, denouement, characters, protagonist, antagonist, character development, all of those things have been articulated by Aristotle, and they'd already been in place for thousands of years of how you told a good story or a good joke. The question obviously begins as your important question, at what point does the storytelling, just the art of storytelling, violate an essential truth of how you communicate history and facts? And so we have been incredibly arduous, mindful that there is a documentary community that looks like an entire spectrum, of which there's manipulation, there's political advocacy, and we have a First Amendment that defends that, to all sorts of things. We've tried to go right down the middle with regard to politics, to just call them as we see them, to not get involved in sort of contemporary fights. We in fact think that history is one of those great mentors that can perch on your shoulder and give you perspectives. You know, when the Great Recession happened in 2008, 2009, friends of mine would come and say, "We're in the middle of a depression." And I would say, "No, we're not. In the depression, in many American cities, the animals in the zoo were shot and the meat distributed to the poor. When that happens, we'll be in a depression." Now, doesn't that give you a little bit of optimism and a ray of hope and perspective in the case of all of the Chicken Littles? And we live in that superficial media culture, as you know, just as we know in New Hampshire firsthand. The world is coming to an end tomorrow. Everything is really, really bad. The sun doesn't shine on America anymore. We have the worst economy. I mean, what history can do is remind you that this sort of thing is this sort of Chicken Little stuff is been around for an awfully long time, and it's a mile wide and an inch thick. So what we try to do is make decisions in the editing room, mindful of a general audience, but also mindful too that children are going to need to be looking at it. Whether it's in elementary school or middle school or high school or college, they will be able to use this, and that it will not have a kind of short shelf life. Most of broadcast television is skywriting. It disappears at the first breeze. We're very happy to say that the Civil War series, just to give you one example, which is 26 years old, is being shown hundreds, if not thousands of times today in classrooms, not the whole thing, in classrooms around the country. And that is extraordinarily satisfying, which means those decisions we make, 1 million decisions a project, that's not an exaggeration, that every project represents 1 million obstacles, 1 million problems. If you see problems in a pejorative sense, then you might as well go back to bed. But if you see them in a positive way, something to meet and overcome, then you begin to understand our process, and you can negotiate each one of them honorably, and hopefully at the end of the day, you've got something that's not just serviceable, that on the hour before the Super Bowl, you guys are watching the Roosevelts, which makes my heart sing, but you know that 25 years from now, there are kids in middle school or high school and college that are watching the Roosevelts to understand about a critical period in our history.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ken. There's two big concepts that seem to run through and converge in a lot of your work, race and place, and you've commented on this before. You're an interesting place, Jacksonville, Florida, in 2016. Can you talk a little bit about race and place and how you see it?
I would say that the number one theme in American history, history doesn't repeat itself. We're not condemned to repeat what we don't remember, as wonderful as that phrase is. Ecclesiastes says it better. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. That means that human nature doesn't change. It just superimposes itself on the seemingly random chaos of events. And so you can perceive patterns and rhymes. Mark Twain is supposed to have said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure rhymes. So as a student of history for 40 years, you begin to see certain patterns. And the number one sub-theme in American life is, of course, the central one, the nature of freedom. And of course, there's implicit tensions right there. Are we talking about collective freedom, or are we talking about individual freedom? And we find in our contemporary political discourse that happening. But two other themes emerge. One is space. I don't mean outer. I mean the fact that we were the first country in which people had a general mobility, that we weren't tied to a particular lord's manor for hundreds of years, but that we could move, we could leave our circumstances and go up. And we had this beautiful continent, a canvas, Thomas Jefferson called it, to fill up. He thought when he gave the 20, he bought, in the greatest land deal in history, he bought the Louisiana Territory for $15 million. Then he asked Congress for an additional $2,500 to find out what 15 had bought, and sent Lewis and Clark out on their journey. And he was absolutely certain, he told Meriwether Lewis, that it would take 100 generations to fill up the canvas. Of course, in 5, we were lamenting that the frontier was gone, and that's another story. But we've always had a relationship to place, to home, to travel, to the beauty of our continent, and that intertwines itself with so much I've done. But we were also born, that human freedom was born under arguably another great sentence that begins, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. The guy who wrote that owned more than 100 human beings when he wrote it, and set in process an American narrative that is constantly having to deal with the question of race. Now, I have gotten a great deal of mail, some of it unkind, over the course of my career saying, why do you keep bringing it up? We're done with this, we're past this, particularly when Obama was elected. Don't you know we're post-racial? And I said, no, we're not. And I think the headlines of the last few years have borne out the fact that we are not. This is something we will continue to wrestle to for a long time. That we have not yet got our hands around, that we still judge people on the color of their skin before we do on the content of their character, as Dr. King asked us to do, and we've got some ways to go. So I don't go looking for it, but I just find that in the stories in American history that we tell, more often than not, a question of race comes up, and you have to deal with it and not run away from it. I asked Wynton Marsalis when we were doing our jazz series about that, and he said an amazing thing. He started off and said race, and then he closed his eyes almost in a kind of pain, and then he looked up to heaven for inspiration, and then he said, race in this country is like in the mythology what the kingdom needs in order to be well. It's something that we don't want to deal with, we run away from instead of running towards, and it's something we have to run towards. And so I took that very seriously and have tried to sort of engage it. It's obvious when you're doing a film on Jackie Robinson. It may be less obvious on the national parks or World War II or the Roosevelts, but it's there. And we, as I said, don't go looking for it, but it becomes something that we need to engage and not just periodically raise up and say, oh, that's too bad, 9 people in Charleston Church, oh, that's too bad, something. But that we have a more nuanced conversation. Even with Jackie Robinson, there's a celebrated professor at USC named Todd Boyd who said, we talk about Jackie crossing the color line, but we never talk about the color line. We tried to do that.
Brilliant. Thank you. So appreciative of you spending these few minutes with us. In about 20 minutes, 25 minutes, Mr. Burns is going to be down in the Swisher Theater and has graciously offered to screen at least 2, probably close to 30 minutes worth of films that have never been released. We're so grateful at Jacksonville University that you'd be willing to do that. But first, showing you the kind of gentleman he is, he's going to go spend about 20 minutes with our students. we have a Terry Concert Hall double packed to the gills full of students looking forward to spending a few minutes with Ken Burns. I'd like to invite all of you to the Swisher Theater. In about 20 minutes, you'll be led down by our student ambassadors. But we are grateful on a day like this to have Ken Burns here as our Global Citizen Award winner. And I hope once again you'll join me in thanking, congratulating, and welcoming him to the JU family. Ken Burns.
Thank you.